And welcome to the program. Charles Moscowitz here. Michael D. Shaw is my guest, as he is on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we do kind of a wrap up of the news of the week and look at events as they're unfolding. Mike, thanks for joining me.
Here I am. And but first question,
Yeah.
is it a little too early for foliage season yet where you are?
I haven't really been paying attention to it.
I've been outside.
No, I get to go out a little, the place to go for that really is either New Hampshire or Western Massachusetts. There's some amazing sites. I've done it. It's beautiful. I'm a big fan of it. They make fun of Massachusetts people going to New Hampshire. They call us leaf peepers. But I mean, it's a cool thing. Although I think that there's also good foliage in other parts of the country.
Yeah, sure.
Since we last talked, President Trump has come down with COVID-19. There was a day or two there where there was a big concern. According to the latest news, he is recovering pretty well. Back in the White House, the left-wing media has gone berserk in terms of every kind of accusation, to the degree that I think someone even suggested that the Walter Reed Medical Center be defunded because they cured Trump. And, people are...
That one I hadn't heard.
Okay. Oh, yeah. And because he stood up on the balcony, they're comparing him to Mussolini, and they're saying that he's saying that there's nothing bad about the virus, which is ridiculous. And the usual technique has been to extract something, out of something he said, to ring it up the flagpole and say, this is shocking and this is the latest. And then to juxtapose that with these so-called poll numbers that show Biden is winning by 20 points, 30 points. Why not make it 100, 80 points? And, that is the daily drumbeat on all the major networks. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Okay. I was not surprised. I was disappointed when I saw some of the vitriolic reaction when he was diagnosed, ranging from many people, including some well-known individuals, hoping that he dies, other people hoping that he suffers and gets cured enough to run and lose and then be tried for treason. And even the one that was kind of a favorite was people suggesting that this was all a hoax, that he wasn't sick at
Michael
all.
Moore. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that he's doing this for sympathy. That was a good one.
So there surely is an audience of people that seem to like this red meat, but it's really hard to countenance that they just keep beating the same drum again and again, and they're called on it in many cases. It doesn't matter. But one way or another, after this election, the media is suffering to the extent that, if nothing else, people realize there's things other to do than to watch the networks on TV. Even if you're left wing, there's other places to get your news. And I just don't see how they can keep going any more than the NFL, with a horrible rating decline every week, acting like it isn't occurring, but of course it is. And then I want to remind the viewers that it counts as watching the show, in this case, the NFL football, if you simply tune to it for 1 minute.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you went on and checked a score or did something. You are
counts, yeah.
a viewer.
That's like, it's similar to if you even have the slightest smidgen of COVID-19 virus and you're hospitalized and you died of COVID-19.
That's right.
They rack that up to the score. And I don't think they will sustain it. I think they'll go out of beeswax eventually. I mean, they'll have to. Now, as far as the whole campaign is based on this bizarre and inarticulate hatred for Trump. That's all they have. I mean, if you take that away, what they have is Michael Dukakis. I
Yeah.
mean, you've got socialism. In other words, nobody in America, socialism has never been generated more than maybe 25, 30% at most of the vote. And if you take away the Trump hatred, which is the impetus, that's all they've got. So, the whole thing is driven by this inarticulate hatred for Trump. I mean, that's what they're running on. And I God forbid they win. I mean, I don't know. What do you think is going to happen?
All right. Well, the first thing I say about the polls are that it is interesting that every time Trump seems to uh, make some gain, they'll do another poll where they'll sample a higher percentage of Democrats than they did before. And what's happening now is sort of similar to 2016 in that I think the term that's used is they're trying to create these disappointment polls where the polls are legitimate, quote unquote, to the extent that they're telling you what they're doing. Okay, we're looking at 900 registered voters, 38% of which, or whatever, I'm sorry, more than half are Democrats. And okay, what's the fallacy there? Well, one is registered voters is not the demographic you look at. You want to look at likely voters.
Yeah, that's right.
You can turn these any which way you want, but there's probably going to be people say, gee, Trump is behind by so much. Why bother? That's what they're hoping for. But as I maintain, I don't really know too many people that respond to polls. It would seem to be there's a horrible selection bias on both sides. Okay. First of all, most of these phone numbers with polling companies are so identified, and most people aren't going to answer these calls except the people that really want to answer that call. And I think the notion of selection bias in polling, you can't do anything about. There's no statistical stratagem whereby you can eliminate the people that don't want to be. I'm sorry, I'm not part of it, from the people that willingly volunteer. There's something different about these people. And that's never been addressed. But I still am looking for a victory for, as you have it on your microphone, Trump 2020.
Yep.
I think they're going to try everything to discourage. They're going to be
they're trying to demoralize the opposition, really. And they, don't bother to come out, you're going to lose. And the other factor that they're not adding in, and I hope this is the case, is that a lot of people, and I can relate to this, they're afraid to come out and say that they're going to vote for Trump.
Absolutely.
They're paranoid. I mean, you could end up, you could lose your job, you could lose your career, you could put yourself under the most hateful kind of attack. I can speak to that. I mean, I had to change my name over this subject. I mean, it's sort of, you keep those things under wraps. And so I think that there is that, and they're all going to come out on election day in droves, and they're going to, with a vengeance, they're going to vote for Trump. Now, I don't know if that's what's going to happen. I think to a certain extent, that's what happened last time. And there are certain other polls that I think are favorable. There was a recent poll which showed a tightening in the so-called battleground states, which now includes Minnesota, which I think is going to be a bellwether. Minnesota is now showing, I think, Trump even ahead by 1 point.
That's right.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Very recent.
New Hampshire, it's tightened. It was always tight there, and now on certain senatorial races, like Susan Collins in Maine has tightened. She was way behind. Now she's within striking distance. South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, that's tightened. He was behind. Now he's within striking distance. So I think Texas has tightened. So this is pretty early on. And also Rasmussen, while they show Trump behind, they show his favorability ratings have gone over 50%. Now, Barack Obama's favorable ratings were never over 50% at any point in his entire presidency. Sometimes he got close, like he might be hovering around 48, But I think that says something. Now, that doesn't mean these are voters, but there's still a lot of time between now and election day. Tonight, you've got the vice presidential debate. That should be interesting. You've got two more debates. I think if Trump can kind of use a little discipline, which I don't know if he can, but if he can, maybe stay out of trouble, I think it's going to be okay. You never know, though. It's going to be very close, and it's absolutely hair raising.
Well, what do you think about this on the tightening of these races? Do you think now that more people who are afraid to speak have come out of the closet as
I
as
don't
the
know.
time gets closer?
Could be. Or maybe people are starting to decide. A lot of people only decide like within a few days of the election. And, I mean, I think that it was um, not who was it? Charles Francis Adams, who wrote the book, Charles Adams, I believe. He was the grandson of John Quincy Adams, who wrote the book, The Education of Charles Adams. And he was like a political pundit at the time. This is the turn of the century. And he made an interesting comment where he said that Henry Adams, where he said that elections are essentially an expression of hatreds. People get out their anger. You go to the polls. I'm going to really stick it to this guy. I'm going to really, and I think that is something that's going to play favorably for Trump, because I think people are sick and tired of this constant attack from the media. They're tired of the burning of black neighborhoods, the looting of black businesses, the killing of black people, and then being told because they are against that they're racist. They're tired of the race identity politics. They're tired of the constant, class conflict, race conflict crap. They're angry. People are angry at the draconian laws around COVID. Being told that by Biden that there should be a national mandate for masks. Being told by, people that they're going to rescind the tax cuts. Since when can a presidential candidate win who promises or who says he's going to raise taxes? I mean, we could go back to Walter Mondale, who said that, and that's why he lost. I mean, I don't think that American people they're going to be like, F you, when they go to the polling place. The best way to stick it to the man, so to speak, is to vote for Trump. There's something like, tantalizing about that. He is the underdog. So I think he's going to benefit from that. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is that um, I was talking to one of my old friends in LA, and we seem to agree on the point that the media has always been biased, always left wing, going back to uh, radio.
Uncle Walter,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
But this dimension of hatred is something new. I'm not saying they didn't have it, but they didn't feel so free to express it as they do now. And it's not just Trump, unfortunately. You take someone like Amy Barrett. Um,
Oh,
and
the attack against her, I think, is going to play in Trump's favor. Already they're starting. The Washington Post did a column by this reporter, Emma something, attacking Barrett's religion and saying, oh, she's a handmaiden and this kind of
oh
crap.
yeah, yeah.
And she's the same reporter that basically accused Brett Kavanaugh of being a gang rapist, and I think that turned most people off. That was so ugly. There he is at a congressional hearing in front of his mother and father and his children, his young daughters, being on national television, being accused of being a gang rapist. And then when he got emotional in his response, then they attacked him for not being judicial enough. I mean, putting a man on trial like that and making those, destroying his reputation, and then criticizing him for being angry about it.
Well, especially when he's in a forum where, because of the decorum, which I don't happen to believe in, but nonetheless, the decorum is that you can never fight back. I mean, this goes
Right.
back to
Well,
Robert
that's what.
Bork,
Oh,
where
yeah, exactly.
where they were accusing him of everything under the sun, and he has to just sit there and take it.
It's a terrible for him, and I mean, I remember that too. I mean, Kennedy, one of the worst scoundrels in
Oh yeah,
American history, saying that Bork is going to bring back segregated lunch counters. I mean, just the most ugly, ugly stuff. And, and because Kavanaugh responded emotionally, all of a sudden there's something wrong with that. I mean, I think the American people saw that for what it was. And, the accusers basically melted away. And I think as far as Blasey Ford is concerned, I watched the testimony and I watched the way the lawyer picked her apart. I think that what she claims happened to her did happen, but I don't think it was Kavanaugh. She didn't place him there. She couldn't really remember that. She only remembered that recently, that it was Kavanaugh all of a sudden, and that she was a Democratic Party activist, and that her lawyer later went on the record as saying, well, this was worth it because we stopped Kavanaugh from voting for against Roe versus Wade. So that made it all worthwhile. It was really a political hit, and I think that people saw that. And if they're going to do that to Amy Barrett, I just don't think that's going to fly. I think it's too ugly, too close to the election. I think that it's, they're in an absolute meltdown. I mean, even recently, I heard Ted Cruz this morning on a local talk show here. He has a new book out, which is top number one on the bestseller list.
Hmm.
It's about the Supreme Court, and he pointed out. I don't know. I haven't had a chance to look into this, but he said that the host here in Boston, Jeff Cooner, who's a really good host, he said, well, how are they going to vote for Amy Barrett when you have two senators who have COVID and who can't go out? And he said, well, they can do it remotely. Now, how long has the Senate been able to do that? Because I mentioned this to a friend of mine who's very liberal, who didn't, he was so upset at that. She said, oh, this is hypocrisy. I don't even want to talk about it. But I guess they can. So I think
Something new. Yeah, it's something new. But a lot of this under the circumstances is new. All this remote stuff with this video technology, really, why not?
Of course. I mean, under the circumstances, I mean, now that the White House is become infected with COVID, and apparently so hasn't Capitol Hill, and so it's not just the White House, it's also the Congress,
Right.
and that most of the people that are affected are kind of mid-level type people, the secretaries and the clerks who
Right.
have to go in and are exposed, but some big people too, like the president of the United States and the
Yeah.
first lady and two Congress senators and some congressmen. They probably should be doing it remotely. We're all doing everything remotely. Why not?
Yeah. Well, here's the other thing. Back to your point of how heavily are they going to attack Amy Barrett? I think pretty heavily. Because you and I could talk here about how can they do that? It's going to backfire. But that seems to be the modus operandi.
Well, I think that they are. I think they're going to go all out whole hog because they have to stop her. They, if she is confirmed on the Supreme Court, that's going to be a huge victory for conservatives. Even if Trump loses,
Yeah.
that's going to be monumental. And so they've got everything at stake on that one.
Yeah, and it even goes beyond their dear abortion issue, because
it does.
How much legislation by the Supreme Court has occurred with these liberal justices, going back for heaven's sakes to Earl Warren.
Yeah.
So this has been the way to get stuff passed outside of the legislative process.
They've started to target that. Oh yeah, they realized that in the 60s that the way to get laws passed was through judicial fiat and also through bureaucracy. Obama talked about that explicitly. He did an interview on NPR while he was still a local state senator fixing parking tickets before he was put in a presidency, where he said, I mean, it was that, we have the important thing in this country is not the Constitution, it's administrative law. They give it different names, they call them mandates, they call them, different functions, but what it is non-elected people making laws. It's completely unconstitutional. The only people that are authorized to make laws in this country is the Congress by vote in public, and state legislators and local city councilors, because we have a legislative republic. It's not, you don't have these, they may create agencies, but those agencies are there to enforce or carry out the laws that the Congress made, not make laws.
Well, of course,
And so
that changed with FDR
it
when
did.
he,
Well, even as far back as Wilson, but
well,
yeah,
yeah, but
for sure,
uh,
it did.
and and then you created all these guidelines and
There's a
policies.
euphemism. Yeah, those are, in
Yeah,
other words, they're making laws,
yeah,
and they can do them they craft them in a way that suits a liberal agenda, and they've got the backing of the big foundations, as we talked about, and who push it in the culture. And yeah, that's what's at stake. There's a lot at stake here. This could really transform the Supreme Court. Um, it's a monumental thing that she might be in there. So yeah, I expect them to do everything to stop this. Who knows what's gonna come up?
yeah. Well, I mean, 2020 has been an interesting year, as they say.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the modus operandi seems to be that it's Catholic bigotry, anti-Catholic bigotry, and I mean, I think I mentioned to you last time. I hope enough Catholics know this. I'm not sure they do because so many of them are now liberal. But, the church is still a power. And I just think when it comes down to it, people in their heart of hearts are going to see that and not sit for it.
Well, I would agree because even people that I know that are nominally Catholic
Hmm.
and may be liberal to some extent regard this as an attack on Catholics and the fact that she's a practicing Catholic as opposed to others who aren't.
Hmm.
I think it cuts through that.
Oh, it's absolutely is
If you
going to be, and
identify at all as a Catholic, then it's offensive.
it's an attack on Catholics specifically and on people of faith generally.
Yeah,
I mean, they're basically saying, look at her, she's ignorant and a boob, and kind of like this hick because she believes in these weird things. It's an attack on religion, it's an attack on faith, and I hope that people see that because it is ugly and it's wrong.
well, it's a standard Marxist technique that goes back to Karl Marx himself,
Sure.
because you have to eliminate some source of morality. There is no morality in Marxism, and uh, indeed, where and I think you'll appreciate this. We've been talking about the father and the son kind of thing, and I happened to see an interview that Mike Wallace did in 1959 with Ian Rand.
Oh, okay.
And both of them I dislike, but it was interesting that uh, Mike Wallace was as obnoxious as he always is, but at least he has some talent that's being portrayed
Hmm.
on the screen as opposed to his son.
Oh,
But as I noted, as much as Ayn Rand claimed to hate communism and Marxism, she lined right up with them in terms of having no morality.
yeah. I mean, look, I've read Atlas Shrugged. I went through a stage, I guess you might say, where I was years ago, where
Yeah.
I was influenced by Ayn Rand, and I not only read her novels, but I also read some of her political and philosophical treatises, and they were very interesting. But you're right. I mean, I kind of moved on from it when I realized that they're hardcore atheists. Everything is about the individual, and there's no objective sense of morality. There's no external source of creation, and yeah, everything just goes along and continues forever. There's no origin. There's no morality that's universal. It's all what you think it is ultimately. And yeah, I mean this is a judge that actually has a moral code that's religious, and they hate that. That's a great danger to those who want to craft and define morality, in their own image, in a way they want. They're trying to overthrow God, basically.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's taken a long time. That started in 1961 with the uh, school prayer decisions,
It
and
did.
kind of continued on.
Do you remember that?
Yes,
So do I. I'm old enough to remember. I think I was in first grade at the time, but I remember it because I remember that President John F. Kennedy got on the air, or he gave an interview where he criticized that decision, and he said, this is a major change in our society, and it's not one for the better.
Well, what happened was I was directly implicated, I did a funny way, that I was in junior high and they would read a prayer over the PA system every morning. And
Right.
these were non-sectarian type
Right.
of prayers.
Yeah.
And they had to be very careful after that. Well, for a while after that decision, they were careful in making the prayers so nebulous that no one could be offended. And then they finally stopped it.
Right.
And
It's sad.
Yeah.
And not only that, but it was unconstitutional because the states have the right to have those policies. It's not any of the
Right.
business of the federal government. And the federal government, the federal court should never have accepted that case. It was not their jurisdiction. I know somebody who works for the federal court, and they say that one of the processes that they go through all the time, every day, when they get cases, from pro se litigants or from whomever, they evaluate whether or not it's in the right jurisdiction. And if it isn't, they throw it out, or they send it to the state, or they send it to whichever jurisdiction it should be at. And that was the case with this. The Supreme Court had no business accepting that case. That was a state matter. Madeleine Murray O'Hair was suing the state of New York, and that's where it belonged, not in the federal courts. And the prayer that was at question was, a nebulous prayer. It was, I'm grateful for my parents, that what they've given me. I'm grateful for the community, and I'm grateful to God.
Yeah.
And that was all. It was not, the word God is just a euphemism. Could be for Allah, could be for whatever. There are many, many euphemisms to describe God. The word itself is a euphemism. I mean, it's just basically saying, I'm grateful to a higher power, something outside of my life, for creating me and for giving me a consciousness and giving me life.
well,
And it was that simple.
for the Marxists, the only higher power is the government.
Yeah. Well, that the guy, and even then, the government is just a tool of their own, control, their own ability to change human nature, and to use the government as a vehicle to eventually create a one world ant colony where governments all fade away, or as Marx said, wither away.
Yeah.
Yes. And then we become one gigantic beehive.
So on I guess, kind of this theme, but maybe moving a little away from it, Hugh Hewitt, who's never been a hardcore anything,
Mm-hmm.
Apparently grew a pair yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
and wrote a fairly scathing editorial that appeared in all places, the Washington Post,
Oh,
where he
okay.
was defending Trump. And I guess to their credit, sort of, the Washington Post will, every 6 months or so, whether they need it or not, run some sort of contrary to them editorial. And then people were speculating on Twitter, like, why did he do this? Is he terminally ill, or what? Is he, because there's going to be some consequences, even among his neocon soy boy buddies.
Mm-hmm.
But yet he felt compelled to do this. And
Good for him.
yeah, well, I mean, he was the same.
Another one is Heather McDonald. I didn't read it, but I heard local talk show host Howie Carr talking about it. She wrote a column about Trump speaking at the White House after coming home from the hospital, and she said that Trump, the reason, one of the basic reasons why the media hates him for that is because he's an alpha male, right? He's masculine. He's like, we have to get over this. We have to be strong. We can, come together. And it's the sort of virtues that we used to celebrate in this country, but we no longer allow, especially for men. And I thought that was interesting. I should get that column, but she made some points.
Yeah, well, that's when you least expect it. I guess, what can I say? People jump in.
Yeah.
not as much as I would like them to.
Well, I mean, there's great risks involved. You take care. You have to take care of number one, so to speak.
Well, I mean, there's
Yeah.
also conflicts. One of the things that's embarrassing for a Catholic is that so few bishops have spoken out about the attacks on Barrett, about all
What? That's
these
terrible. What about
so-called
Notre Dame? Have they stood by her?
only to the most superficial extent, because what's in play here is that uh, they're allowed to have their positions if they're quiet about them. But
Uh,
where it gets absolutely sickening is when they come out with this uh, single garment nonsense, that somehow what happens to an immigrant being denied uh, going across the border is equivalent to a child being aborted, and uh, we should control. And the reason they're taking this approach is that the church gets a lot of money from the federal government uh, through support of various activities they do in what you might call social welfare. And they don't want to mess up their little arrangement with Caesar here. So, and it's appalling to
it
many,
is.
many real Catholics. But there you go. So when people
Since when
speak
did the
out,
Catholic Church take? I mean, I always thought that they were very autonomous in this social services. I mean,
well,
it's one of the best and greatest social service agencies in history, probably the best.
well, right,
And
but then they expanded so that the government was in effect contracting out some of these services, and you're talking about a fair amount of money here.
right, I get it.
And of course, the other thing that many of these bishops, frankly, are liberal, are, in my humble opinion, functional atheists, and they just, I would say, the majority of them are in favor of Biden, which is
Probably.
hard to countenance. But there you
Well,
go.
maybe Biden himself is a certain type of Catholic, as is Nancy Pelosi, right? As is Andrew Cuomo. I mean, they're
Teddy Kennedy.
Teddy Kennedy, the Kennedy family, right? Maybe not John F.,
Yeah.
but certainly Ted. And yeah, I mean, that's what worries me, because so many of them have, and again, I mean, there's a bigger problem with Jews. I'm certainly not saying that. I mean, Catholics still have some remnants of that basic moral code.
Well, see, that's
But
what makes it worse, because uh, for the Jews, if they want to go back to Maimonides and so on, they can talk about this. But it really, there's not a recent history of Jews going out of their way to be paragons of moral virtue beyond tikkun olam.
which is just another euphemism for social justice at this point.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
didn't used to be. That was transformed. It was one of those concepts that was co-opted by the left. And I mean, this is a long history. It's an interesting history. In fact, it's in my new book, which, by the way, is available as of today as
Oh,
an ebook, and it will be available in about 2 weeks as a paperback. And that is God is God.
Amazon?
Yep, God is God. God is the creator and the lawgiver. I am going to begin very slowly. I'm not going to. I'm taking this thing very carefully to do some interviews, but I'm only going to do them selectively. I'm only going to reach, and I want to start maybe with some relatively smaller programs
Sure.
just to get used to it. Sort of build. It's like a Broadway show tries out in a small city.
Yeah, I would avoid Bill Maher.
No, I'm not going to go. Not right away. I'm going to go with. I'm going to go with the smaller shows. It's like a baseball. It's like a pitcher warming up. You don't just go right out. You go through a process where you get ready. So I'm starting that, and I'm going to gradually build up to the bigger shows, and it's going to be interesting. I mean, I'm looking forward to talking about it. But yeah, I mean, I get into what happened to Judaism. I get into some really controversial questions in this book, like, did the Jews kill Christ? These are big ones.
The big one.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I get into
I
that.
mean, I can't think of a bigger one, but okay.
It's one of the great questions of history. And I get into, I prove scientifically, according to my opinion, that God exists. And then I talk about what that means. And a lot of the biggest metaphor in the book is the Adam and Eve's fall from grace and what that meant. So I'm looking forward to rolling it out. I talk about why America is an exceptional nation. It was an interesting book to write, and I'll say that I've written many books, and this one was in a way no different than other books I've written, in that it was somewhat of an intellectual exercise, and the research was looking at history, looking at philosophy. But after writing the book, I feel like I am undergoing a spiritual experience, and I am
Hmm.
not somebody who is prone to mystical things. Generally, I'm more of a rationalist. I'm a secular Jew, but I'm experiencing something.
Well, you're not
Was
speaking like a secular Jew now.
No, I mean I'm experiencing some things that I had not expected to experience, and I think that it was as a result of the exercise of writing this book. So I am going to talk about that, and I think that hope maybe this book could have that kind of impact on people. I don't know, but who knows? It's
Well,
available.
here's a left field suggestion.
Yeah.
What if you were to present this to some group organized by your local Reform synagogue?
Oh
Because even
boy.
in a Reform synagogue, well, no, I'm serious. There are probably people that want to have some reason to still be Jewish.
Yeah, but this book gets into. I talk about what constitutes a conspiracy against God. I mean, I get into some stuff. I get into a lot of the stuff I've gone into in previous books in that regard. But the reform establishment is not going to like that.
Well, okay, here's why I say that.
Yeah.
I was asked many years ago, and I'm still living in LA, to address uh, a Jewish medical fraternity of practicing physicians in LA.
Right.
Some of these were big deal guys, all right? And as you can expect, most of them were liberal and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But what I did was, it had to do with comparing how the government ruined the movie industry to how the government ruined healthcare. Uh, uh, for some of your viewers may not realize that there was a big antitrust movement against the motion picture industry in the 40s and 50s, because in many cases they owned the theaters and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And someone decided that was a bad idea. So there was regulation of this. One of the things that happened was no one denies that the quality of production went down. A lot, and there was problems with people trying to make money on the exhibitor side. And then you talk about how the government, as an analogy, uh, tries to regulate healthcare, and all the doctors could identify, no matter what their political persuasion, with how that's been screwed up. And again, there was such a strong interest in this thing that they were following me out to the parking lot of the hotel, still wanting to talk to me about this. And believe me, these were your typical Beverly Hills liberal Jewish type people that maybe a light bulb went off. Maybe I was making
Oh,
the
that's
right analogy.
amazing. No, I'd love to get on some of those shows and maybe even go out to some of these places. That, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of, as I say, I'm working my way up to that one,
Okay.
because those are going to be pretty hot. I mean, that's going to be, when they see the book. I mean, it's going to be interesting. I want to start out with friendlier shows, um, but I'm going to work my way up to that one. That's amazing. Yeah, people are looking for answers to dilemmas, and they're looking for a reason. And by the way, the Hollywood those antitrust suits, I think, also resulted in the removal of the moral code for Hollywood,
Uh, yes.
which I think was a bad thing. And there were a lot of liberal Jews involved with that. There's no question about that. That might have fueled some anti-Semitism, which is another thing I get into in my book.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, they basically gutted that. I mean, one of the one of the film producers that kind of led the way on that one was not Jewish. It was actually Igmar Bergman from Sweden. who brought sex into movies under the guise that it was artistic, right?
Yeah.
Artistic license. And that kind of opened the door to a lot of the changes. But so that I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, so the actual hard copy book will be available in
In about 2 weeks, the hard copy. Right now, it is available as of today, actually, on Amazon. So whatever, we'll see.
no, I mean that should be good.
I'm looking forward to the promotion of it and seeing what sort of conversations I might have with people. Me, it's a subject that, as I say, it's very transformative to me, and I think that these kinds of conversations will have that effect as well.
Now, what about book signings? How hard is it for you to do that?
Well, I mean, right now, pretty hard because no one's doing it because
Yeah.
of the virus. But once the book is out in a soft cover, I might do some of that.
Maybe
We'll see.
I don't know. Do they still have these?
Oh yeah, no,
No, what I'm saying, do they still have the Hillel centers at universities?
sure. I mean, I've done it before. I did several of them on my book about the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem,
Okay.
and I did one at bookstores. I remember doing one. I went to New York and did one at a bookstore.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean that's possibly there. I don't know. I mean, I have a feeling that most of my promoting this book is going to be talking to people on the air, to a lot of fellow YouTubers.
Yeah.
There are some pretty big ones that I think will have me on when I'm not going to contact them yet. I want to save it, but people like Jay Dyer, I don't know if you ever listen to him. He's very good. He talks religion. There are a lot of them out there. Eric Metaxas, he does religion, he does faith, and he's very big and he's very bright.
How do you think this would go over with a guy like Prager?
Good. I mean, I'll reach Prager at some point,
Yeah.
and some of the people that are with him, and also Ben Shapiro and his people.
Medved, he's still around.
Medved. I don't know if Daniel Lapin is still on the air, but any of those people. I mean, at the right time, I'm going to approach them and see about getting myself on. But we'll see.
Okay.
So it'll be fun.
On the COVID side, there's been last couple of days been a lot of publicity given to a real doctor who sees real patients in the community of El Centro, California. It's toward the border. It's a desert town, and he claims to have treated 1,700 patients with his cocktail of hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and a couple of different antibiotics, and has achieved real success. Claims that he did not lose a single patient, and it's getting local publicity in California. So we'll see what happens with that. I mean, he was even so bold as to suggest, and I'm not necessarily supporting this, but he suggested, because he was asked by the host of this TV show, which I believe was local to that area, of the 210,000 or whatever the number is, lives that were lost, how many could have been prevented with this protocol? And he claims they could have cut it by 75%. All right.
No, that's incredible. In fact, I think, Mike, you actually recommended someone to me that I interviewed. I think it was a Dr. Graves from Texas.
Yeah.
And she had the similar story. She's treating people with a combination of hydroxychloroquine and antibiotics and zinc. She's taking it herself. They're all taking it in her office as a prophylactics, and that it's been very successful. So, they talk about the United States having a higher rate of COVID deaths and hospitalizations than most other countries. But I think the unspoken story is that that's not because we're not wearing masks. It's not because we're having lockdowns. It's because in most of these other countries, you can get hydroxychloroquine over the counter. I think it's something like 40 countries around the world.
Yeah.
The Asian Rim, Israel, Europe, Africa. I mean, Central America, South America, you get hydroxychloroquine like you buy a pack of gum. It's just available. So I think that we're going to eventually find out, and I don't know this, but that is why the death rates and the hospitalizations are less in those countries.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's different about healthcare in the United States is how heavily regulated it is compared to well, it's even more regulated in Europe, but compared to many other places, and even in Europe, you don't have this unbelievable conformity that exists of all these doctors. Just it's literally better to lose a patient than to go off the prescribed trail. I've seen this happen. I've seen two good doctors that were personal friends of mine. They went a little bit, off the path, and the establishment came down on them like white on rice. In one case, the guy was older and just decided to retire. In the other case, the guy fought it and won. It cost him a lot of money, and he's still there, but he's been wounded by it, let's say. So it's very hard to find someone that's going to go outside the playbook.
Oh, it is. I mean, I can speak to that even like in my own, like I didn't want to have all the vaccines when my daughter was born, and the doctor had to he took a hit on her record over that because we wouldn't do it, and she went to bat for us. Eventually, we did some of the vaccines, some of them we didn't.
Yeah.
But I didn't think it was appropriate to do them when you have a prematurely born baby in the hospital, and I've been completely vindicated by that because one of the vaccines they wanted to do, 6 months later, it turns out it was causing severe damage to children. So, you have to make your own decisions about this. And the medical establishment, oh, there was a doctor at that hospital who had a complete meltdown over me. Oh, you're a right-wing militia nut, and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, the trouble is that there don't seem to be consequences because in your case, you were proven right a few years later, let's say. And by
Right.
then, what are you going to go back to this guy and say, I told you so, and so on? It's very sad.
Well,
And
doctors have become apparatchiks of the establishment, and they're dependent on them for money and for support. There was in the news recently in Maine, this doctor who had been in practice for like 40 years, who went completely off the grid in terms of using, even using the computer and having records. She just was writing prescriptions. She had patients that she had known and she was treating their children. She'd been a family doctor. She started to go to people's houses and she kept her own records off the grid.
right.
And the state came down on her like a ton of bricks. Oh, it was a scandal. She'd never seen anything like it. She's
Yeah, well,
fine.
they
But
were trying to exercise control.
yeah,
Uh, and by the way, the case I always cite as to the so-called unintended consequences of these various regulatory policies, the greatest example is Medicare. All right, when Medicare came out, it was specifically stated that whatever the policies were only applied to people over 65.
right.
But don't you know that the compensation schemes and protocols and so on that had for people that were 30 years old were now affected by what Medicare did. And I don't know whether they always thought this would be the case or whether there was some vast conspiracy, but no one can deny that Medicare changed how medicine is practiced in the US.
Right. Not only that, but Medicare I mean, there was a period of time when I got a license to sell health insurance
Yeah.
and life insurance, and I had to study Medicare. And what I discovered was that it's kind of a scheme that it talked about rationing. I mean, they only give you like a little bit here and a little bit there for this time, but not that time. And it's so heavily regulated that it's a bit of a, it's really a bit of a scam anyways. And it does set the stage for what any kind of socialized medicine would look like,
Oh,
which is
absolutely.
highly regulated, highly rationed. People will die. I mean, it's just not, and then you have to buy supplemental anyways to even get anywhere. It's kind of, and they take they're taking the money out of your paycheck all your working life. It's called FICA,
Yeah,
FICA.
yeah.
And, you're better off buying your own health insurance. I mean, or investing in a health plan that accumulates capital and that you can then draw from when you need it. It's really not a great system. And same thing with Social Security. You'd be better off having that money go into a private pension. The government can play a role maybe in mandating that. I remember having on during the Obamacare debates, I had on a very bright professor who actually was a major player in opposing Obamacare. And he pointed out that an excellent model for a system of health insurance was Switzerland. Now, I know that we can't compare ourselves, but he said that Switzerland has universal health care, but it's completely private.
Yes.
In other words, you have to get it, but the companies compete. You choose whatever you want. And if you can't afford it, the government might come in and you can apply for a subsidy. But for the most part, it's private. And it's comparable, for example, on a state level to automobile insurance. Like in Massachusetts, to have a car on the road, you have to have basic insurance coverage, which I think is a reasonable regulation.
Yeah.
But the government has nothing to do with the actual policy. You choose your policy. There are companies that compete. You can get extra if you want it or not. If you buy a new car, you might be required to get it, but that's a private decision by a company. And, it's not regulated. That's how I think any kind of a health insurance plan ought to be done.
Well,
Yeah,
the
they could
interesting thing
say,
about Switzerland is the
right,
U.S. spends the most per capita on healthcare. The country in second place is Switzerland, and they spend about half per capita of what we do.
mm,
Now, you can't make a lot of direct comparisons like that because in the U.S., you can have access to any ridiculous type of diagnostic you may want in most cases. Sometimes that's overkill, sometimes it isn't. But the Swiss model isn't bad.
right.
How it could be applied to a country that's so much larger is a debate, but
Well, I mean, it shouldn't be applied nationally. It should be applied statewide, and the state, each state, just like states regulate auto insurance. I mean, even like Romneycare was much too big, much too expensive, and much too regulatory. But it was a state thing. I mean, it was better than Obamacare. The state actually lost because of Obamacare, and it was that none other than Franklin Roosevelt who accurately noted, and he had been a former governor, that the states are the great laboratories of democracy. The states should have the ability to experiment with these sorts of questions: healthcare, welfare, education, not the federal government, and that the state can then adapt to a level of healthcare that the people in that state want.
yeah, I
Same,
guess
same.
I
Go ahead.
was going to say, I guess he forgot that when he became president, though.
You're talking about Romney. I mean,
Oh
what
no,
is
no,
it?
I'm sorry. I thought you mentioned Roosevelt.
Who?
Oh,
No,
uh,
no. Mitt Romney,
oh, it was Mitt Romney. I'm
when he
sorry.
was governor of Massachusetts,
Okay.
he implemented what we call Romneycare,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
a
yeah. I'm
microcosm
familiar.
of Obamacare. Of course, when he was running for president, he disavowed it. He pretended it never happened. But but whatever. But the point is that the states, and ultimately the states, will be involved and should be involved with regulating things like abortion policy, not the federal government and not the Supreme Court. Those are state questions. I mean, if the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade, Massachusetts will immediately, probably within 24 hours, pass a law that supports the same status quo of abortion
Right.
that was there. And I think that's how it should be done, not by the federal government. And that if a state doesn't want it, that's their right. It's the right of the people of that state. That's what a republic is supposed to be. The people of that state can elect local representatives to vote for certain things or not.
Yeah. Well, of course, what happened in that case was that there was no national COVID policy, and it became to whatever the state
Whichever
wanted.
state. And of course, the states have to be, they can't, that doesn't mean the state can become like a fascist state. I mean,
Well, they did.
they did, and they overstepped themselves. They should be, and now they're being challenged. It's finally coming out. Michigan, Wisconsin, I think Pennsylvania. They were challenged, and that whole regime was overthrown. Massachusetts, it was being challenged. The only reason why that didn't go anywhere was because the head of the Supreme Judicial Court passed away. But I think that's being challenged now on the state level, and it's falling apart. Hopefully,
Yeah, it took a little too long.
it
for
did.
my taste.
And too many people got used to the idea of the government stepping in and exercising that kind of fiat power.
Man, let's face it, a lot of people seem to like that.
Yeah, it's further left you go, the tighter the mask.
Yeah, well, the whole mask thing is interesting too, because there's been a variety of studies, and indeed, I'm going to write about that in this for next week's Health News Digest issue. But people definitely don't like it.
No.
And the efficacy is, there really haven't been controlled experiments. The closest thing is studies in hospitals before and after a mask policy, but you can argue that that's a pretty rarefied type of environment to run this kind of test. But nonetheless, I'm going to examine some of that. But by the same token, there's also data that's been widely publicized showing simply graphs of COVID cases before and after mask policies were in effect, which doesn't really prove a lot because there's no control. So there just hasn't been very much science on this.
No. And the science has been, a lot of that's now been debunked. And the idea of a national mask mandate, I think that Biden himself talked about that right early on, but you notice he stopped talking about it.
Yeah.
People don't want that. That's not a winning argument.
Well, he is talking about he wants to create a Roe law if he's elected.
Yeah, and that's also something that's not likely to happen. It's not constitutional. But yeah, I mean, I think that was a misstep from him.
Well, there's been, the other one that comes to mind is in the last couple of days, he was making some reference to the fact that how some people were sacrificing during this COVID. And he said, and you all ought to be thankful for, this is a direct quote, those Black women who have been stocking grocery shelves and never challenged on this.
There's a great YouTube video out there about all the racist statements he's made, going all the way back to, including using the N-word pretty regularly.
Yeah.
In public, going back to he's been in office for 40 years.
46.
And he's originally a segregationist and a big friend of Robert Byrd, who was a Klan member. You want to talk racism, let's have it. I mean, that's, whatever. I mean, that doesn't matter though, I guess.
No, well, that's their history, and they're the Democrats, and they have to embrace that.
So anyway, Mike, but where can we find your latest column?
All right, it's always on healthnewsdigest.com, and I archive everything going back to the beginning of time.
How many columns do you have up there?
Well, I mean, the problem with Health News Digest is he doesn't archive it to the beginning of time. Probably only for the last 9 years. But if you want to see everything I've ever written, everything on the health stuff, I archived back to 2004 on one of our business sites, which is gasdetection.com.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 700-800 of those columns.
Have you considered publishing it as a book?
Well, I think we had this conversation a few weeks ago. The trouble is, it's all freely available.
That's okay. You can still publish it as a
book.
But
if you want to say pick so many greatest hits and put them in a book,
yeah,
I think the only way to do that is to have someone else pick the greatest hits, because most of the time, and you're a writer, most of the time. You could tell if you've written something that's better than average, but it's often better if someone else takes a look at it.
You're right. You could get someone to look at it for you.
Because in the immortal words of the late songwriter Jerry Goffin, who was married to Carole King, when the
Did
song
he pass away?
oh yeah, he died a few years ago.
I didn't even know that.
Well, he had drug problems. He was
Had a lot of stuff going on.
he had a lot of issues. But if you remember the song by Little Eva called Locomotion,
Yeah.
which went #1,
Yeah.
and then a number of years later by Grand Funk Railroad went #1,
Yep.
and then by Kylie Minogue, I think didn't quite go to #1, but was in the top 5. He was asked, when you wrote that song, did you think it was going to be this multiple time big hit? He says, frankly, I didn't think it was that great, but I'll take the money.
That's true of any artistic. I mean, like Led Zeppelin, they didn't know that Stairway to Heaven would become
No.
that standard.
Because
Plus,
you're producing this stuff,
you
and
just,
you don't you don't have time to compare it to other stuff that you've done, and
you can never tell. You can never tell.
yeah, I
So-
mean, if I could tell you what your greatest book was, and you probably disagree. So
Right, exactly. You can't tell whether something is going to click or not. You do it as best you can, and you put it out there. What can you do? Anyway,
I'm looking forward to seeing your book. So
thank you. All right, Mike, listen, I'll talk to you next week. Pleasure as always. Great
Sounds good.
talk. Thank you. And I'll talk to you soon.
See you next time.
All right.